What the hell was that? I asked as we walked along at a brisk pace. Motivation, Terry answered. Motivation to get out of here. Take credit for the discovery, and send someone else here so we never have to talk about it ever again. That's the best idea I've heard today, Sandy agreed, quickening her pace despite her obvious struggle for air. Wait, I said, noticing this. We need to stop and catch our breath. Eat something, drink some water, I suggested. We found an offshoot room relatively absent of the strange liquid, with some stone chairs to sit in for a bit. Once we took some time to rest and refuel, I opened my bag and withdrew my medical kit again. Hey Terry, let me see your hand. I think we should try and change your bandage. He stood from his seat and walked over to me as I placed one of the portable lanterns next to me, opened the kit, and looked for some fresh bandaging and disinfectant. Does it still hurt? I asked as he held his hand out to me. Nah, not anymore, but I can't move it really well. It's all numb now, he replied. That's no good. You might have severed some tendons if you can't move it. I said a little more grimly than I intended. Let me try and see what's going on, I added, taking his hand and starting to unravel the bandage. All at once my heart dropped to join my colon as several fleshless fingers fell from the fabric onto the floor, and the putrid stench of rot wafted through the air. Oh my God, Terry! I shrieked as I climbed over the back of the chair in alarm. Terry, your hand is rotting apart! I yelled at him, still looking at the liquefying flesh of his hand as the bone shone through most of his hand up to his wrist. He squinted at me for a second, cocking his head in confusion, as if not really processing what I was screaming at him for, or the reason for my sudden reaction. That all changed the moment he took his vision from me and focused on his decaying appendage. Oh no. No, what the fuck is wrong with my hand? He screamed as he convulsed in shock, the movement causing the remaining fingers to break loose and fall to the floor, leaving only the exposed bone of his barely clinging thumb remaining. His and my panic was joined by Sandy's shrieks of terror once she realized what was going on. I'm not entirely sure who threw up first, but we all got around to it eventually. Either from the sight or the smell or a combination, or just the situation in general. We all got around to it. It took several minutes for everyone to somewhat calm down to a reasonable level, but not as long as you might think, possibly due to lack of oxygen and the exhaustion it was causing. Just get me out of here. Just get me out of here, Terry repeated as Sandy and I tried to reassure him that he would be okay. Please, just let me get out of here. I want to go home. I want to go home, he said, rocking back and forth, holding his freshly wrapped hand. Beck? Sandy said from the corner of the room, causing me to turn to her direction. She was pointing to Terry's old, bloody bandage we had left laying on the floor. A thin stream of the yellow substance had made its way across the room from a puddle next to the wall and was slowly creeping closer and closer to the bandages. Then all at once, as the fluid finally touched the mess of gauze and blood, it rapidly enclosed it and snatched it back over to where the puddle had originated. I watched in horror as the red color rapidly drained from the gauze and disappeared into the liquid. Time to go, I exclaimed, pulling Terry to his feet and guiding him through the opening of the room back into the corridor. As we moved back into the hallway, I fumbled through my backpack and withdrew the .38 pistol that I'd kept stashed away up until that point, and tucked it into my front pocket. Another hour passed, and the lack of oxygen was starting to take hold. Every breath was painful and labored. On top of that, while we had plenty of batteries for our lights, they became less and less effective at pushing back the dark void of the cavernous city tunnels as we dove deeper and deeper into the labyrinth. Terry was the worst off. He had stopped sweating. His once bronze tanned skin had become pale and damp to the touch. He could barely speak, and it was all he could do just to keep up with me and Sandy. He's getting really bad, Sandy, I told her as we sat down to rest. We need to get out soon. I know that, Beck, she replied softly, staring at the ground and sliding her foot away from the puddles that had begun to slowly advance towards us every time we would slow down or stop. We only made it about 30 minutes once we started walking again, before we had to stop and rest. Sandy and I might have been able to go a little longer, but Terry was now only able to move by propping himself up against the wall and dragging his feet little by little. We got him over to a small outcropping that resembled a bench so he could sit down. "Terry, I know you're tired, but we need to keep moving, please," I said as kindly and patiently as I could through my gasping breaths, which could hardly be heard over the deep, wheezing, wet breath of Terry, which seemed to get worse and worse with every inhalation of acrid air. "Come on, Terry, try to stand. I'll help you," I said, taking his arm and putting it around my shoulder. I stood, and the entire sensation, the movement, the lack of weight, the sound, it made a cold chill run down my spine. I didn't know what just happened, what I just felt, but I was sure it was bad because it made Sandy shriek and sob uncontrollably. I moved away from Terry as fast as I could and turned to face him just in time to see his arm, no longer attached to his body, slide out from under the sleeve of his shirt and onto the ground with a wretched, visceral sound. "Terry, I tried to stammer out, but the look in his eyes, I don't think he felt a thing, if he even knew what just happened at all. I walked back over to him and noticed the gurgling, moist noises of his breath seeming to be coming from the wrong place. Then, as I looked him over, I noticed something almost completely hidden by his shirt. So I unbuttoned it and pulled it back. I couldn't help but recoil. The entire right side of his chest was riddled with decaying flesh and open, seeping holes, some of which bubbled and spewed as he inhaled and exhaled. I had found the cause of the gurgling sounds. Nausea set in again as I looked down on his rotting torso, the person it belonged to rapidly being putrefied alive. I can't remember what I was about to say in that very instant, but I never got the chance, because that's when a different, louder sound echoed throughout the corridor in the direction we had came. We couldn't see the source at first, just the continuous noises of deliberate, dragging footsteps and loud, slurping, sucking, retching sounds. Sandy and I both focused our lights into the darkness and watched as it came into view in the distance. The silhouette of a person began to appear, the gleam of a single metal button giving away exactly what was coming towards us. Then it finally got close enough for its face to be illuminated. I still see it when I close my eyes. Its skin was still rotting and degraded as it had been before. Its head bobbed back and forth as it pulled and jerked its body into each step in its desperate efforts to reach us. I watched in revulsion, terror, and disbelief as two milky eyes began to pool and congeal in their previously empty sockets and roll backwards into its head, as a long, grotesque tongue pushed its way out of its mouth with a slimy squelch, as its skin became more lifelike and ductile with every step. As the tongue split and thousands of spines blossomed from the squirming, convulsing muscle, I watched as it reformed itself as it closed in on us. I glanced back at Terry, but noticing his missing arm laying on the floor. One of those streams of liquid had reached it, and what remained of the limb was disappearing into the horrid fluid. Then my eyes met Terry's. Then he looked away, and I followed his gaze down to my revolver in my pocket. No. I can't, Terry. I couldn't finish my sentence and just shook my head. Then he looked me in the eyes one last time, a look of pleading and defeat that broke my heart right then and there. After that, he never took his eyes off my pocket. He just stared at it as tears rolled down his cheeks. I slowly reached into my front pocket and pulled out the small revolver. Holding it tightly in my shaking hand, I pressed the barrel up against his forehead. The sounds of the corpse growing closer and closer, faster and faster behind me. I counted. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. And pulled the trigger. Click. Click. Click, click, click. That was the moment I learned that ammunition can expire. I watched the exact moment Terry resigned himself to his fate. He used his eyes to guide my attention down to his backpack on the ground. Then he looked down the hallway to the right as if pointing with his eyes, telling me to take the bag and Sandy and run. "I'm so sorry," I mouthed to him, unable to force any sounds from my lips as tears ran down my face to match his. I snatched up his bag and grabbed Sandy by the shirt, leading her down the corridor. The sound of tearing clothes and liquefying flesh, being peeled and sucked off bones, filling our ears as we listened to Terry, our friend, die a horrible death, alone in the dark. We both bawled as we ran away, still fighting for each and every breath we took. We didn't get far before we both slid to a stop. We rounded a corner that led to another hall, strewn with dozens more bodies that were now slowly beginning to twitch and writhe on the ground as they tried to get themselves to stand. "Oh my God, Sandy, oh shit, what now?" I whimpered desperately. "Come on, back this way," she answered, pulling me and doubling us back down a different path. "We need to find something that looks like the entrance. We can blow it through with the stuff in Terry's bag," she explained as we ran down corridors and darted around corners. It didn't take long before we had to pause and rest for a second. But that was all it took. One of those things lunged out of a recess we had just stopped in front of and tackled Sandy to the ground. As she screamed and fought back, I took out Terry's crowbar from the bag and started smashing the creature's head in. I watched as its skull caved in deeper and deeper with each blow, but it wasn't fazed at all. Suddenly it gave up on Sandy and turned on me, knocking me back against the wall. I tried with all of my strength to hold its face away from mine, but it was so strong, and I had nothing left anymore. Sandy had taken my place and began stabbing it in the neck with her pocket knife, but it still didn't seem to bother it. It pushed and pushed as it forced me to the ground, as its spine tongue wriggled and reached for any part of me it could find. Then I felt something. The carving tool from that room. It had fallen from my bag. Not hesitating, I grasped it as tightly as I could and stabbed it into the corpse's temple. It went limp in an instant, like someone had just cut the strings of a puppet. "Sandy, get it off!" I shouted. "What did you do?" Sandy asked, pulling the emaciated body off of me. I opened my hand to reveal the small, pointed, gold-colored tool in my hand. We both watched as the creature's blood seemed to evaporate off of it, as if it were very hot. "I don't think those things like this stuff," I said, putting it next to one of the trickling streams of yellow fluid which bent and squirmed to avoid making contact with any part of the metal tool. "I'm sure that means something important we don't have time to figure out," Sandy said, leading us further into the hall. We went farther and farther on until we noticed the walls becoming coarser and coarser, like they were unfinished, still waiting to be smoothed down and carved with new stories. We pressed on. The air was worse than ever now. We were both beginning to become disoriented and weak. At first we thought we were hallucinating when we noticed the hallways starting to get tighter and tighter. But as the roughly hewn corridors became little more than narrow tunnels, we knew that it wasn't our imaginations. We were now walking through spaces in which both shoulders scraped across the wall as we went. The panic began to set in, as we gasped for oxygen in the dark tunnels. We could hear them in the distance now. They were on our trail, and getting closer by the minute as we squeezed through small openings and crawled through halls so narrow we had to take off our bags to pass. "I can't breathe, Sandy," I gasped as I fought for any air I could get in the cramped space we were crawling through, on our hands and knees. "I think the walls are closing in on me. They're gonna crush me, Sandy. They're gonna crush me. I'm gonna get trapped here and those things are gonna eat me like they ate Terry. Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me down here, Sandy. Please, please, please." I began to panic and plead, the lack of oxygen and claustrophobia taking full hold of me. "Hey, I'm not gonna leave you. You're not getting crushed and we're gonna get out of here, okay?" she said, taking my face in her hands. "But we need to keep going." Finally shaking it off, I managed to push on until the crawl space opened abruptly into a cavern. And at the other side, on top of a small flight of stairs, a large stone slab like the one we came through. We ran for the steps, feeling the air begin to return to our lungs for the first time in hours. We pushed it, but it didn't budge. "The dynamite," Sandy said, opening Terry's bag. We heard the creatures closing in on us in the distance.
Hurry! Light it!
Turning to look over her shoulder at the hole we had just entered through.
Hurry!
I flicked the lighter and brought it up next to the fuse. Hey, what happens if they follow us out? I asked, looking up at her frightened face.
We'll have to figure that out then. Now light the fucking thing!
She shouted. I touched the flame to the fuse, but it caught too close to the stick.
Sandy, run! Short fuse!
I screamed, trying to push her back down the steps as the dynamite went off right behind us, blowing the stone slab apart, and us off of the stairs. My vision faded back to me slowly as daylight poured in from outside, the deafening ringing in my ears still not having subsided yet. Trying to recollect myself, I looked for Sandy.
Sandy, we're almost at...
I rolled on my side to see a single, twitching human hand reaching out from a massive pile of snarling, sucking, writhing corpses. She had landed closer to the entrance. They must have found her fast. Choking back sobs, I rolled onto my hands and knees and crept silently as I could towards the steps, but I kicked a small rock that brought all of their attention straight to me. I made a break for the exit with everything I had. Climbing the stairs, hand and foot, I made a mad dash for the light. I felt the jagged nails of one of their hands rake down my leg as I jumped through the opening into the partially charred grass outside and braced myself, waiting for them to pile on top of me next. But it never came. I stared back into the pit as glowing eyes stared back at me. They moved back and forth, occasionally reaching a hand into the light, only to pull it back instantly, emitting a cry of pain each time as smoke sizzled off of their burning skin. I watched on for hours, their eyes never breaking contact with me, or so much as blinking. The sun was fading, but I was exhausted and I didn't have anywhere to go. I couldn't even stand anymore. I made it out, but they would still be able to wait me out. My vision was starting to fade from either the exhaustion or the concussion, or both. But I could feel my consciousness beginning to slip away as their glowing, sickly yellow eyes peered out from the darkness, waiting for their chance. "Hey, you okay? You're bleeding." A voice spoke out, jolting me back to consciousness. I opened my eyes to a man standing over me in black clothes. He knelt down next to me. "There any others? They didn't make it, did they?" He seemed to get his answers from the reaction on my face. "There's something in there." I managed to stammer out and raise my hand to point to the destroyed stone barrier. "They'll be out soon." "No, they won't. It's already being dealt with," he said, never even bothering to look in that direction. But as I did, one of those things made a desperate attempt to escape out of the opening into the sunlight, only to be dragged back inside, screaming and clawing at the ground as its smouldering body disappeared back down into the hole. Still, the man never even glanced that way. "You guys set off an illegal explosive in a wildfire zone. Stupid, but that's what helped us find this place in the end," he explained and scolded. Well, both. "We're going to take you back to the vehicles whilst everyone else handles the mess in there. Then we'll see about getting you fixed up." "Please, get my..." I started. "We'll retrieve their bodies," he said before I could finish. The next thing I remember is briefly waking up in an all-terrain vehicle, surrounded by other people wearing the same clothes as the men. Then, shortly after, I passed back out and woke up in a hospital. The man from before was gone, but a pale woman with silvery white hair was sitting in a chair next to me. Once she saw I was awake, she picked up her phone and did something on it. A few moments later, the man walked into the room and sat next to me. "We found something we weren't supposed to find," he finished for me, leaning back in his chair and resting his hands on his head. After a moment of eye contact, he spoke again. "What do you think I'm about to say to you?" he asked me bluntly. I guess this is where you tell me not to say a thing to anyone about this or else, right? Isn't that what normally happens in situations like this?" With a grin, he replied, "Yeah, sounds about right. For a government conspiracy movie or a story about aliens or something. But we don't care. Doesn't matter to us. Go ahead and tell someone. You'll be in a padded room within the hour. I could show someone where it is, I suggested. No, you can't, he said, shifting in his seat as he allowed me to catch a brief glimpse of a small gold-colored bar he kept in a pouch on his belt. We have a specialist wiping that entire place off the face of the earth as we speak. It'll be like it never existed. Part of me took comfort in that, but another part felt frustrated that my only 2 friends in the world died discovering it, only to have it vanish without a trace. My thoughts were interrupted as the man spoke again. We have a pretty good idea what went down in there. You think knowing monsters are real is hard. That's easy. You get used to it. But you went into a situation you weren't ready or prepared for at the cost of 2 people. And almost yourself, too, he said as he stood from his chair. And you have to live with that for the rest of your life, whether that's 10 minutes or 60 years. Then he took something out of his pocket and tossed it into the hospital bed. A small consolation prize, he said as I picked up the tool that I took from the room. Just try to keep it to yourself. They'll kill me if they ever find out, he added, waving off a judgmental look from the woman, who stood up and walked out the door with him. Then he opened the door and left me sitting in the bed by myself, twirling the metal tool through my fingers, as I looked at it closely in the light for the first time. It's been several weeks that I've been spending in this Peruvian hospital, waiting for whatever punishment I have coming for sneaking into the country. But I've finally worked up the nerve and motivation to tell this story to anyone who would listen. I know I'm no adventurer, but I can't let this be. I need to find out who those people are. They knew things. Hidden things that you and I aren't supposed to know. I need this for me, and for Sandy and for Terry. So now you know. Anyone who has any information that leads me to them, that strange metal, the weird liquid in the city, this mysterious lost culture, anything would be so helpful. Anything. Goodbye all. Hey guys, just before you go, I wanted to suggest a cool documentary that just came out on Animal Educate. If you know me by now, you probably understand that I am a massive wolf lover and wildlife enthusiast. This well-made documentary explores the grey wolf's relationship with man, how it's been unjustly demonized, the possibility of it returning to Britain, and how to overcome the obstacles in the way. It's absolutely free and well worth the watch.